So I'm calling the Dummerston Town School Board meeting to order at 6:03 for the purposes of discussing the pending merger vote coming up on November 7th.
Okay, well, thank you for coming out on this wild and wet day. Everybody had power. So, as Christina said, we are here tonight to talk about the vote that's coming up on November 7th. And to give you a framework from how we got to where we were to what we think we should be as a group. The study committee has worked long and hard, but I'll go into that in a minute. So one thing that you're going to notice is there's articles of agreement. The current draft, or the final draft, is up here. If you'd like a copy, please feel free to take them.
Sure.
More than one? Did you want to talk about it?
It's okay.
September 11th.
Thank you.
Hugh, you need one?
Well, if he sends it, yeah, I think I'll borrow it.
Okay. Mark, you want one?
Yeah, just want to see where you guys were after all this time.
You already have them. Okay. So one thing that we're going to do that was really effective when we had Donna Russo-Savage from the Vermont Agency of Education come down and talk to us, we are going to have written questions. We want to keep this, make this not a debate about the law. If you want to debate the law and its relative merits, then those types of that type of feedback should be directed to your legislators. But here tonight, we are talking in Dummerston about the proposal that we have made that you as the voters will get to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to on the 7th.
So here's paper. I'll
Yeah.
pass it
And there's
if you'd like.
all kinds of
Write
pencils
questions.
too, if you need them. It's already going around. Already going around. There is a public sign-in sheet that should be going around as well. If at the end of the meeting, if someone could make sure it comes up to the front, that would be great for a public record. So we, as a study committee, the study committee, just to give you a little background, we formed back in the fall of 2015. The Act 46 was passed that summer of 2015. Study committee consists of members of Dummerston, Brattleboro, Putney, Guilford, and initially of Vernon, but we'll get into that a little bit more. The plan that we're presenting to voters on November 7th is specifically for Brattleboro, Putney, Dummerston, and Guilford. It excludes Vernon. So we will start our presentation. So why now think about unifying? The reason we're thinking about unifying now is because it's the law. Act 46 required school districts to come together, think about how they operated their schools, and what was and how effectively we were delivering programming to our students. So the members of WSESU, Brattleboro, Dummerston, Putney, Guilford, and Vernon, we formed the Act 46 Study Committee. Act 46, as you probably all know, has 5 goals. One is to provide equity in terms of the quality and variety of educational opportunities to our students. The second one is to lead students to achieve or exceed the state's educational quality standards. 3, maximize our operational efficiencies through increased flexibility. And then 4, promote transparency and accountability. And then 5, deliver all this at a cost that parents, taxpayers, and voters value. And I've mentioned who is WSESU. It's these 5 towns: Putney, Dummerston, Brattleboro, Guilford, and Vernon. And it's been a 2-year journey, as I said. We don't have the full study committee here tonight, but it's been a very meaningful experience for me personally to work with people that are as committed to children in public education and who are as willing to go the extra mile. We have spent hundreds of hours together debating and then redebating specific topics. And I think it's a great example of what our communities can do together when presented with a significant issue, such as Act 46. All of our meetings have been televised on BCTV, so if you want the entire history and can't sleep one night, it'd keep you up for at least one night of meetings. And then all the information that we have that we have accessed and used is posted on the WSESU website. There's an Act 46 study page that you can gain all that information. So our challenges, like across the state, have been multiple. We have declining enrollment. And this is the high school enrollment trend from 2002 to 2015. These are the other 4 towns. Dummerston is the blue. And as you can see, everybody is steadily trending down. And across the state, it's about a 20% decrease in student enrollment, and we see that same trend within WSESU as a whole. This is data for the Brattleboro Town School District, which is their K to 6 program. Yeah. Here's the actual numbers for all of WSESU enrollment. So we're not, minimal increases, if any, and just steady decreases. If you go to the next slide, we're looking at our current enrollment as of September. So Brattleboro Town is down to 725, BAM is at 293, UHS is at 776, Dummerston's at 145, Guilford's at 110, Putney's at 175, and the grand total, the cumulative total of all these, the student population is about 2,200. And again, here's how it breaks out in terms of the individual grades. And again, this information will be on the website for you to access. And again, here is the Brattleboro information, or the high school information, sorry, broken out by town. So we continue to see steady declines in our student enrollment. We have seen the opposite in terms of educational spending. We've seen steady increases in our educational spending. In FY 2005, the state spending average was about $9,000. WSESU schools combined was almost $11,000. In FY 2015, we spent on average about $16,000 per equalized pupil, and then the state average was $14,000. One thing to remember about this number, it's the equalized pupil number, is not actual students, it's a weighted ratio. So just because we have 145 students in the building now, doesn't mean that we're going to have equalized pupil number of 145 students. It's a weighted average over a couple of years, and also different students equate to different percentages. Like a preschooler is a little less than half of an equalized student. So along with more examples of our increases in educational spending against the state threshold. So in 2015, we were over the threshold in Dummerston, as well as at the high school and in Putney. And as you all know, we're not spendthrifts. We try to be fiscally conservative and chip away at those expenses that don't add to our educational programming. And another challenge, a third challenge, is the rising poverty rates in our area. Consistently from 2006-2007 school year, we are seeing increasing rates of poverty. It's most pronounced in Brattleboro, where I believe Academy School has free and reduced percentages of up to 70 some odd percent. Dummerston's is right around 35%, last I knew. But that has been ticking upward. We're also seeing more transient families in our communities with less stable households. And we're also seeing families that need more social supports. Is probably related to economic climate and also opioid problems in our area. So looking at all this data and a lot more, the study committee since August of 2015 worked collaboratively together. We studied the data for our districts, and we only showed you a portion of the data that we looked at. More of it is on our website. We learned, we had a lot of discussion about our schools and our communities, what they value, what's important to them. We took a lot of public input at our meetings. At times it was often loud, so because this is a very emotional topic, you know, and thinking about it, you can't get on two more emotional-based issues than property taxes and children. So it's quite a combination. And then as part of this whole process, you know, we sought feedback from our local boards because each one of us is a member of a local board. And we used all of that to create the report with articles of agreement as required by Act 46. The reports with the articles of agreement was unanimously approved by the study committee. And when we presented it to the Board of Education in late September, it was unanimously approved by them as well, with commendations for the work we had done specifically related to the school-based leadership councils. I think one of the State Board of Ed members said this was exactly what Vermont needed, which was gratifying to hear. And now it's really up to our voters. On November 7th, if you haven't already cast your vote, but you get to weigh in on what you think. And part of the information that we're going to go through now is how did we get to the Articles of Agreement as written. So what we learned, we studied all these topics. We looked at programming, we looked at Title I, we looked at buildings and assets, we looked at student outcomes, class sizes, per student costs, community culture. One thing that we recognized as our conversations evolved was that each school has a different flavor, so to speak. If you are to go, and it's one of the things that I appreciate most about serving on, you know, as a school board member, is you do get the opportunity to go around to other communities and see and get a feel for what their school is like. You know, Putney Central has a unique culture and a feel about it, the same way Dummerston does. And that's evident when you go to the other towns as schools as well. And it's evident in Brattleboro between Green Street, Oak Grove, and Academy. So we found distinct differences in equity in what we are offering our children in terms of programming and opportunities. And we also saw distinct differences in the quality and the variety of opportunities that were available in our schools. We looked at educational outcomes. Again, here's the SBAC results, or not again, but here are the SBAC results for English, language, arts, and math across the different schools in WSESU with the corresponding poverty rates. And for Dummerston, we had a 43% poverty rate that particular year. We had outcomes that were 80 and 55%. You know, we're good. But we also found differences in costs and in spending on each student, equalized student. And, you know, we also looked at alternatives that were offered during, or options with Act 46. They included REDS, which was Regional Education Districts, the side-by-side, the layers, the 3x2x1s, the modified union. We looked at offering school choice, and we also looked at retaining the same structure we have now. And we found that none of them result in the outcome with greater benefits than the proposal that we're putting before you on the 7th. As a study committee, and as representatives from your local school boards, we believe that this option, this merger that we are proposing under the Articles of Agreement is the best option for our children and for our communities. It allows small schools to stay open. It provides better educational opportunities, broader educational opportunities, and it also addresses issues of transparency, particularly within the WSESU budget that you currently as voters do not have the ability to vote on. And most importantly, it achieves the goals of Act 46. So we believe that the proposal that we're putting forth offers more value to our communities. It builds on our strengths as a supervisory union and as individual schools. It retains school cultures, and it also addresses our weaknesses. It offers opportunity for increased community involvement, particularly through the school-based leadership councils. You all should have gotten a little postcard in the mail with this type of information, but this is what the study committee felt a merger achieves. It achieves educational equity. It achieves sustainability. It achieves efficiency, collaboration, and educational opportunity. It improves, or it maintains local leadership, and actually improves it by doubling the amount of people involved through the leadership councils. We offer better support to our students and families, particularly those that are on that edge. It'll allow students who are moved around a lot due to instability in their families to remain in one stable school for their career, which has had proven benefits. And then this is a merger and agreement that's been crafted by your community members, your school board members. We've worked hard over the last 2 years. Each one of us cares deeply about our individual schools and about our greater school populations as a whole, all of our children. It's not about just our Dummerston kids, it's about all of our kids, and educating them to the best of our abilities. So what does a unified district offer? It offers one board of 9 members that will look at programming and opportunities for students in all the buildings. It's going to be work will be based on student outcomes on one continuous improvement plan, not different continuous improvement plans. There'll be one hiring structure for all employees, and we will be able to offer highly qualified staff full-time positions. Right now, it's a challenge at times because, say, Dummerston has an opening for, and this is just an example, a made-up example, a technology instructor, and the community, our community decides to approve in the budget a 2-day-a-week option. It's going to be really hard for us to find a 2-day-a-week person who's going to want to come into a school. If we can pair it up with, say, Putney's 3-day-a-week position, through a unified district, we have one full-time employee that's going to cover both schools. If it's not unified, then you have 2 employees, you have 2 health plans, you have 2 payrolls. It gets 2 benefit plans. It gets very complicated and inefficient. Let's see, we talked about the shared employment, then removing the obstacles. We have a cohesive leadership team in the form of central office and unified board that is able to review policy and strategy through one cohesive lens. Staff will be shared as agreed upon, and this is particularly important for behavior programs, for new curriculums, for working through best practices within the classrooms, and then also instituting a broader-based teacher leader program that's been developed in some schools right now, where senior teachers support more novice teachers in their growth and development as professionals. It would be part of this whole plan to have that expand across the entire unified district. Program expansion, educational programming would be, we'd have the increased ability. We would be able, say in Dummerston, to tap into the existing foreign language program that's in Brattleboro with a nominal expense. We wouldn't incur that burden alone, and we'd be able to tap into an existing established curriculum. So we could get more pre-K programs more easily and into our more schools, including Dummerston, and we could offer after-school and summer school programming that already exists in other schools such as Brattleboro. And we could potentially offer universal meals as a part of this. So what happens to the governance structure? What happens is, instead of all the different entities, we're six separate boards, we become one unified board plus 9 leadership councils. In terms of representation on a unified board, this is dictated by statute, and it's based on census data. So Brattleboro will have 4 residents, or 4 representatives on the unified board. There will be 1 representative from Dummerston, Putney, and Guilford, and then the compromise that the board study committee worked out was that we would have 2 at-large positions that could be voted from any community. I think we all came together, and Brattleboro very graciously agreed that yes, they were the quote-unquote gorilla in the room, and didn't want the smaller communities to feel intimidated by that. So this was the hybrid model that we came up with. So it allows, Dummerston to have potentially up to 3 representatives if we have motivated people to run for the offices. So the leadership councils that the State Board of Education commended us on are school-based advocate groups. They are appointed at town meeting and then appointed by the chair of the unified district. The councils will have a chair, vice chair, clerk, and committee representatives. It's going to consist of the principal, the building administrator, unified board members would be assigned to participate in the specific school-based leadership councils. And then there would be staff, parents, community, and potentially students depending on subject matter, so that we have a complete voice coming out of these leadership councils to the unified board on what each individual school needs going forward. And again, we did this specifically to maintain that local input that we felt as a study committee was being lost by the formation of one board. And we also felt it was very important to maintain the local flavor in each of the schools. So, what will be different is town meeting. There's not going to be a vote on the school budget from the floor anymore. It'll be by Australian ballot. And then, like I said, the community members will be nominated for the leadership councils at town meetings. And then any discussion about the unified district's budget would be held at pre-town meeting type meetings, informational meetings, similar to this, where we go through probably line by line, answering questions. And then, yeah, the vote on the entire unified budget would be held by, on town meeting day by Australian ballot. So.
Sure. Just, so the district budget, one of the things that people noticed and talked about in other towns is that it also brings forth the ability for everyone to be voting on the high school budget and that supervisory union budget. Right now, the supervisory union budget's about $18 million. And the only way that that's seen and has any oversight is by the school board members that are on the supervisory union board. So each one of us feeds into that supervisory union board. But those are the only eyes that see that. There's no public viewing of it. So that is one oversight that would be more transparent and that the townspeople would have as direct that you don't have now. And also, I don't know if it happens as much in Dummerston as perhaps in Brattleboro, but people always try to ask about the high school budget, and that's a separate meeting right now, and you have to go out on a separate night to look at the high school budget. So this budget would be in it, and it would actually be all of the schools. So you'd be looking at BAMS, Dummerston, Putney, the Wyndham Regional Career Center, the BUHS, the 3 Brattleboro schools, all of the schools that are in the merger, all of the townspeople from all of the towns would be looking at that budget. And of course, you'd be able to identify, just as we do now for Brattleboro, you can identify by each school, so Dummerston's portion will be clearly identifiable. But you'll have a direct vote on the entire budget.
So, in addition to the items listed on the previous slide, what else will be different is that students won't have to leave their school if they move, if their families move them from Putney to Dummerston. They can stay in the town, or in the school that they were originally enrolled in. The other thing that's different is that a student from, say, Brattleboro might be a little better fit for Dummerston's middle school program. Might like a little smaller, more intimate experience than BAMS, and that would be another option. Obviously, we can't have everybody flowing, to one particular school, so there will be controls set on it. But really, the focus is on what the students need and how we can set them up to achieve the best outcomes. Teachers and other staff could have their children very easily attend the school that they're working in. In the past, I know, sitting on Dummerston's board, that we've had teachers come in from surrounding towns, ask to have their child enrolled here, and the money does not follow that child, so we would be paying for that. So in this case, we are all one, and that becomes a moot point. Unifying also gives us the opportunity for students to be in a school that best suits their needs. So if, say, Dummerston's not a really good fit, then maybe, looking at some of the other schools within our unified district, the parents and the teaching staff might be able to find a better fit for their child. There are a lot of numerous educational benefits for individual children and their classroom communities. And kids could remain in their same school in their elementary years, so that they have that type of stability. So, one thing that the study committee really felt strongly about, and it was reiterated by the Secretary of Education, is Act 46, and I know I'm going to get groans or head shaking from the crowd, but Act 46 is an excellent way to keep small schools in communities. It takes costs and spreads them out over a larger base, and provides opportunities for efficiencies that schools like Dummerston just do not have right now. It offers more stability and safeguards to keeping them in our communities. As a study committee, we have had many conversations about how important schools are in the smaller communities and how important they are to the viability of a community. So that has been, you know, a huge talking point for us, and something that we feel is a win for this proposal. We went as far as to write that no schools are going to be closed within the first 5 years. We feel like those are transitional years, and we would not want to do anything abruptly. So we would get our unified system up and running, and then as things progressed, if the need arose, we would consider closing a school. But right now, that has never been the intent, and according to central office, there is no need to do that. If it does come to that, there's a lengthy process that's outlined in the Articles of Agreement that you have that involves communicating with the towns, getting input, and really evaluating the effect a school closure might have in a small community like Guilford. It would be pretty devastating for Guilford. And then if a school is ever closed, it gets, quote unquote, sold back to the town for $1. And this is just a slide that represents what we envision with a unified school district, that we have children of various heights, AKA capabilities, that need different supports. And this opportunity to form a unified district really gives each of those children distinctly what they need to be successful in their educational endeavors. So what happens if the vote on November 7th is positive? Well, Act 46 allows for up to $150,000 grant money to help transition to a unified system. That would go mostly to administrative costs, converting accounting systems, that type of thing. And another advantage is that right now we have the opportunity to decide how we want to come together. And we think that the Articles of Agreement is the best way to come together. Schools that are getting small schools grants, like Dummerston and Guilford, will continue to receive those grants. And then we have a greater chance of keeping smaller schools open and viable. And then after we have
tax breaks.
Yeah, we have the tax breaks. That's, well, not tax breaks. What do they call them? Transition funds. They keep the state keeps changing terminology. It's a little hard to keep up. And I should really emphasize too, for the study committee, this was a real learning process as we went along, because the state would actually sort of shift and change things as we went along. So, but we do get the 8, 6, 4, and 2 cent reduction on property taxes for those first 4 years as we transition to a unified district. If a merger is voted down, this is what was provided to us by Donna Russo Savage, who is the principal assistant to the Secretary of Education on school governance and works for the Vermont Agency of Education. She was also part of the legislative, I think was the lead on drafting the language for Act 46. So if the voters do not approve a unified union school district, then when the state board creates the final mandatory statewide plan, that will consider everything that it has before it then. And then if the board of one or more of the school districts submits a Section 9 proposal that proposes a merger or that proposes something other than a merger, then the state board will consider that information. If a citizens group submits a proposal, then it will consider that submission, and it will also consider the study committee's original merger proposal and any additional information as well. So it really looks at the big picture when we get to the statewide plan. The Secretary of Education will prepare a proposed statewide plan, but the legislator authorized and required the state board to make the final decision. So it doesn't lie with Secretary Holcomb. It's actually with the State Board of Education to make the final decision. If the merger is voted down, then we lose any financial supports that are offered as part of Act 46. That would be the transition grant of up to $150K plus the 8, 6, 4, and 2. And the small school grants go away as well. By December 26th of this year, if the merger is voted down, then each school district that won't be part of a unified structure by July 1st, 2019, has to perform the 3 tasks listed in the response to the first question, which is look at its options, collaborate with others on possible unifications, and then, what was the last one? I don't remember what.
It's essentially coming up with the whole plan.
Yes.
Articles of agreement.
Right, trying to justify why unification with another group of, or another district or group of districts is not in the best interests and does not meet the requirements of Act 46. Anytime a Section 9 proposal can be submitted in advance of that December deadline. And the Agency of Ed will provide feedback on it. And I know there's work being done locally to look at that. And then through May 31st, the Secretary of Education is going to review all the Section 9 proposals and have conversations with those local boards submitting them. And then the local boards can have the opportunity to amend or supplement as necessary their proposals based on that feedback.
It's also possible, I didn't understand this until recently, it's also possible for the school boards of each town to look at the articles that the study committee has written and just say, this is what we want to do, which has kind of been the indication from Guilford and from Putney that that's what they would do if the merger fails. And to just send forth and say, we've already studied this is where we want to go.
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
So what this is saying is, what happens if it's voted down on November 7th? So at that point, the school boards from each town are charged with looking again and seeing how they can merge, because the charge is to comply with this law, you have to meet the goals of this law. And part of that is to look at the merger opportunities in your area and to go through the entire process that we've been going through for 2 years. So an option 4 or 2.5. So one of the options that's on the table for any school board is to say, okay, the study committee has studied that for the last 2.5 years. We've had representation on that committee. Do we want to just put forth exactly what the study committee has already written? And my understanding from Guilford and Putney is that they are strongly leaning that way, that would be their answer if it's voted down.
So I found in my notes here the 3 things that a local board like Dummerston, who's looking at other options, besides the unified proposal here, the three things that our local board would have to do in terms of a Section 9 proposal, we'd have to self-evaluate the district's our ability to meet the educational and fiscal goals of Act 46. That's the first thing. Two, we'd have to have conversations with other districts in the region, inside and or outside the SU, about how to work together to improve regionally. And then third, we need to submit a proposal to the Secretary and the State Board of Education that outlines the analysis that we did and proposes the specific steps that the district will take to improve RVE, the goals of Act 46.
Can I just ask, how do you see that? So you're basically saying that if it's voted down in those towns, they're gonna turn around and propose the same exact proposal that you've submitted, even though the voters, so what does that mean then? They're gonna turn around and put into place what you've just done for 2.5 years?
The
That's-
school boards have to look at that and
Yep.
decide.
Yep.
And I can't speak for Guilford or for Putney, but indications have been in the past that
We feel at this point, this is the best proposal that will suit Guilford's needs.
So essentially, it's gonna get voted down and then put into place by the school. That's what you're saying?
No, it's not getting
No,
put into
the
place
school
by-
board doesn't get to put anything into
No.
place. The
But they
school
get
board,
to present it as their
yes,
proposal.
the school
So
board
does-
is charged with going forth with some sort of an answer to the state.
Yeah.
And so Guilford's representation here is saying they feel that this proposal is theirs, and so they would be happy to send that forward. And I've heard from Putney at different times that that's what they said, but I'm not gonna speak exactly for Putney, and we don't have anybody else from Putney here tonight.
And Dummerston may not choose to do that, you know.
Right,
we-
I'm just saying that basically, that's my understanding, is that you're saying the voters will vote it down, and then the school board will then turn around and present it to the state anyway. So that, I just want to know that that's what, that's the
thing to
clear.
be really clear, I
Yeah.
think, on right here is that
Yeah,
the school boards, right now, the town's people get to vote,
Mm-hmm.
up or down on what the study committee has come up with. After that, if it's voted down, the town's people do not get to vote on anything again. At that point, it goes up, and I finally got this clear in my own head in the last week. So at that point, it goes up, goes out to the school boards, and the school boards make their decisions and send up something. They're charged and must do that. And any local citizens group can also send something up. And each one of our school boards would have to decide what it is. Then the state will take into consideration, if we go back one, the state will take into consideration all of the conversations and the proposals and any amendments and additional information that's sent up, and then the state's going to make their decision. And it will not be voted on by any of us at that point at all. This is our chance to vote.
And that was one of the reasons we put that as a pro for this. We actually get to determine our own destiny. We have, albeit not everything that everybody wanted in the Articles of Agreement, but there's a good portion of it does include. There were some points where we just could not come to agreement on as a study committee, and we didn't address. The town vote is one of them. I know that some folks sitting in front row felt very strongly about it. But, you know, as a study committee, we opted not to do that.
I would like to ask, say
No,
something, please.
We're gonna.
Excuse
I
me,
know,
I'm the
but this is-
chairperson, excuse me, Joe Dummerston. I'm the chairperson, it is a Dummerston Town School Board meeting. We have the Act 46 committee here as guests. I think it would be great to let them finish their presentation and ask clarifying questions afterwards.
Yep.
I'm very concerned with open meeting law that we are not giving people a chance to speak. Open meeting law allows chances to speak for the public and express opinions. So, as the chairperson, I can make reasonable exceptions or reasonable rules around public comment. And I think that this group, it's Dummerston's tradition that we speak warmly to our guests, we are considerate, and we are brief. And if we can proceed with that, I am not willing as a chairperson to limit comments to written comments. 1 minute after the presentation is done, and I appreciate as a teacher, I like people to be able to interrupt, but let's let them get through the program. If you have a clarifying question, and I'm going to limit it to one question per person, 1 minute.
Okay, so we're almost done. June 1, 2018, Secretary of Ed issues a proposed statewide plan that may or may not include any other proposals that were put forth by local community members, local boards. And then through November 29th, the Vermont Board of Education is going to review those proposals and take testimony. And then, you can supplement if you're part of that group presenting. And then November 30th, they're going to issue a statewide plan, 2018. And I believe it will go into effect July 1st, 2019. That's, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and yeah, that was the last one. So, and just to clarify too, I know you were opting for 1 minute, but the problem with that we've had in the past that we thought we might address with the written questions is to really stick to not the debate of the law, but to focus on questions that people had about the article. So, and that worked really effectively with Donna Russo-Savage. I don't know if you were there for that discussion or not, but it really kept a nice tight focus on what is and isn't possible under Act 46. So
I'm happy to moderate if people are going down the rabbit hole of arguing and debating the merits of the law. I'm happy to, and I'm asking for your agreement that we are discussing the articles and not debating the law. Nobody here, there's no legislators in the room, so nobody has the power to change the law. We are just volunteer citizens who put in hundreds and hundreds of hours, so if you can limit your comments to clarifying questions about the articles or opinions about the articles, I think that would help move this along. And if that's acceptable to the group as a chairperson, and if this doesn't work out, I'm happy as a chairperson to impose a written question. Cool.
all right, can I start from?
Absolutely.
Okay, do we want to start over on, I know Mark, you don't have any really merit, because you don't live in the area anymore.
To see how much progress you've made in the last 9 months.
Do you have any questions or comments?
I have not, no.
I don't right now, no, thanks.
Rick?
Yeah, Rick Mills from Dummerston. Congratulations on getting this to go to a vote. I'm sure it was questionable over the last 2.5 years. I want to voice my concern or discuss about school closure again. And I saw the screen up there, and I'm just wondering, as I was following the study committee's progress over the last 2 years, I thought at one point there was a vote that was actually written in there, and now all I see is that if a town would bring it up in the next 5 years, or is still, ultimately it's going to be this, if it comes to fruition, it's going to be the board's decision to close the school, regardless. I mean, you're going to listen to the input, and what's to keep a very conservative resident from coming up to you guys and saying, look, I want the lowest taxes possible, and I think we should close Dummerston School? I mean, when it says the town has to bring it up, I don't know who in the town would do that.
It's not brought up by the town.
In the first 5 years, that's what I think we said.
I think in our
Right, in the first
conversation,
5 years, it says the town brings it up. Well,
No.
who would that be?
Right, no, so that's the idea that in the first 5 years, no school closures are even really considered unless somebody came up from one of the towns and the town said, we want our school closed. Otherwise, there's no closures even thought of in the first 5
right,
years.
and Rick, all the interpretations that we have talked about in the analysis that we looked at was, just for instance, if Dummerston got down to 35 students, would it be feasible to keep your school open? Would it be viable, number-wise? You're going to know when you get down to a certain number-wise whether it's viable to keep your school open. And that's why Guilford is fighting tooth and nail, because we've lost such, the enrollment has declined such that we really need to look at how can we maximize what we have for, what we have to offer, as well as keep our school open, because that's the hub of our community. And we know that where we're at now, if we could go either way. So if we go down to, 40 students, 30 students, would it be worth it to keep school open? We're gonna know as a community whether we should keep our school open or give the children an opportunity in another school system where they have more to offer. So it's really, I think that's kind of what we took out of it for Guilford is, you know, you've got a good numbers, you're looking at the statistics, if Dummerston is doing well, but to lower your cost per pupil by going through merging into the district with 2,200 students, your costs are going to be significantly, or should be significantly less. And I don't think Dummerston is in that situation where you're going to lose the school.
What about our middle school? What about our enrollment, including the 7th and 8th grade? Is
I
that,
can't promise you nothing. I'm just saying, that's what we were looking at as a school as a whole. We're not looking at anything in particular. That's never been discussed at this level.
The discussion about middle school movement, we determined early on that that's not a board decision. That is more of a curriculum-based decision. So that's why we couldn't legally, we checked with legal counsel, we could not put that into our articles. I know it's something that Dummerston and Putney both felt very strongly about, given that we have middle school programs. But we could not include that in the articles.
I want to make a comment on numbers, just so you all have it. I think it was up on a slide, but it was really fast. And I think all of us talk about little Guilford, but truly Guilford's not so little.
Feel little.
Guilford is 110 students, and Oak Grove is 146. There's 145 in Dummerston, but you guys have 7th and 8th graders. And you have 7th and 8th graders, 15 and 14 is 29. Somebody can do the math, 145 minus 29. How much is that?
Take 30 away. You can do it, Jill.
I can do it. Come on. 115. 116, thank you. So 116 for you guys in Dummerston if you compare to 110 in Guilford. So it's not that.
as well, Jill?
What's that?
Pre-K in those numbers?
Yes.
Pre-K, yes. So there, we
In
break them back
Guilford
up.
and in-
13, take down 13 for Guilford, sorry.
Thank you.
And Dummerston doesn't have it. So, and Putney's at 175, Vernon's at 162. But the school, when we looked at them, really, I mean, Oak Grove is not that far off in one school in Brattleboro. And honestly, sitting here from Brattleboro, I'd say too, we have 3 schools. Myself personally, if I'm on that board, which I'm not even running, but I'd look at it, and it's on page 7 of your Articles of Agreement, the school closure part, and you'll see where it says that one of the things you have to look at is what's the effect on the community if you close the school. So if you want to look at, do you close one school in Brattleboro, or do you close one school where that's the lifeblood of the community? And that's the type of thing that the unified board would have to look at, and there's a whole process laid out here. It's also not something that can be decided in one night and suddenly sprung upon a community. It has to be announced and discussed over a year. There's, I think, 2 meetings, 1 year of study, at least 4 public hearings regarding the proposed school closure, and at least 2 of them have to be held in the community where the school is located. And if after conducting public hearings, the Unified District's Board of Directors intends to vote, it shall give public notice of its intent to hold a vote on whether to close the school, stating the reason for the closure at least 10 days prior to the vote. We fought with legal counsel on this too. This was in, then it was out, and we fought to put it back in because we knew this was a big decision and a big thing. So it's set up to not be something that can be done lightly and in a rush. But Guilford was the ones who chimed in the loudest, saying this is something that eventually the community knows, that this is no longer a viable school, that it needs to be looked at. When we're unified, we all would be looking at that, and we can see what's best for everybody. And I personally don't see how that decision is made along lines of, well, we all want one town to close because we hate one town. I just don't see that.
Yeah, and just so people know too, Jill was the one that crafted most of the language in that. So I think it's quite telling that somebody from Brattleboro would take it to heart, the concerns of our smaller community. So Yes, we're
And I just want to say too, that with the 5-year minimum, that we can't do anything for 5 years anyway, and then it's another year on top of that. So you're really looking at, before a school could even be closed in the district if this passes, you're looking at a 6-year period of time. And anything could happen, population-wise, whatever, in 6 years. And
You could
it-
even work on putting more kindergartners in,
Right.
in 6 years.
and,
That's
and,
impossible.
and boost the numbers up. The other piece to it is about, you talked about middle school, you mentioned about the middle school thing, and being Brattleboro people, there wasn't a discussion saying, let's make them close their middle schools. And I think Amy's right, is that keeping it is a curriculum decision with the unified board, if that passes, that this is the best decision or not the best decision, but what's the administration say? What is that unified, as a study committee, we didn't feel like we could do that with this to the unified district that's coming in. But there's no desire to close 7th and 8th grade in Dummerston or in Putney, because as Amy said in part of her presentation too, is that there's a unique flavor here that happens here, And if this passes, it could be that there's kids that are right now struggling in BAMS that would do better in Dummerston or better in Putney, and transferring them to one of those middle schools may be a better educational decision for that kid, which then would boost the numbers in this bill, potentially.
It also allows, if you're unified, it allows you to have some of those middle school teachers which require specific licensing and are harder to attract and retain full-time staff if you don't have enough of a position to give a full-time position. You could be sharing those teachers more easily between Putney and Dummerston and BAM. And you could be increasing what you can offer to your middle school kids.
So I'm limiting that we've had 5 minutes of response. It's probably a filled explanation, so I think we could probably move, if I'm limiting the public to 1, I'm going to have to limit the study committee to 5 minutes of answering. But I appreciate we're answering. A lot of people have the same questions, but I think that's a good place to start.
So, Molly, did you have any questions, concerns?
I did have one I was wondering about. I saw a lot of information about the leadership councils and what their composition is, and I didn't see anything about decision-making power and where that happens and what, how, are they advisory, are they decision?
If you go to Article 15.
I don't have a copy of that document, I'm sorry. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yes. Article 15 is the article about leadership councils, page 9. Thank you. Starts on page 9, and it is, we did task them against legal counsel's advice with specific roles and responsibilities. And that's listed on page 10. That they're established so that each school will provide local input on school-specific programs and activities. We've already talked about their composition. There's a bulleted list in the first full paragraph on page 10. They're going to, leadership councils, the way we envision it is that they're assisting in coordinating local school communities and advisory organizations, including PTO, any endowment committees, and food committees, if your school has them. They're going to be providing recommendations to the superintendent on budget development, capital investments, including building and grounds projects, and technology and library resources. They're going to make recommendations to the superintendent and principal for school-specific practices and procedures related to district policies. Recommendations could include, but not limited to, facility use, technology acquisition, and school-based activities. They are going to be consistent with state statute and procedures established by the superintendent and serve on interviewing committees for school staff and faculty. The leadership councils will also coordinate and review individual school performance data with the superintendent, and they're also going to be providing yearly activity reports to the superintendent. All of this would be carried over to the unified board. So, it's not a PTO by any means. It's definitely a more thoughtful, data-driven group that will be looking and advocating on behalf of their school and its programs.
Molly, is there something you feel that it's missing, that you're looking for specific or?
I was just looking at the slides.
Okay.
No hidden intention. You can count on me, I'm great.
Anybody else over on that side of the room have questions, comments? Okay, well, if you do, we'll work our way back to front here, so anybody starting? Yes?
Here, but you had that slide that talked about the 150,000, if it's approved. Is it the right number that the state would then?
Yes.
Is that's for the entire district?
Yes.
For all of
For the
these,
unified district.
for the unified district? So forgive my ignorance on what exactly is the state providing currently for grants? And is it, it's individualized to each school, which you talked about, those would continue if we get voted in?
Well, Frank can speak to the financial issues. He's our, I don't know if everybody has met him, he's our WSESU district business administrator.
Yes, sure. So the small schools grant is what we've referred to in addition to this transition grant of $150,000. And that's a calculation that the state does, that as a school gets smaller, the grant gets larger. And the state has recognized, the legislature has recognized that that is a sort of an unintended incentive to stay small and get smaller and still deal with all the cost containment initiatives that the state has put in place over the last 10 years. So they're saying they want to remove those small schools grant. Dummerston has received fiscal year 16 was about 34,000. In the current year, we budget a similar number. So that support goes away if we don't merge. There's another thing that goes away that is, well, let me also qualify that. It goes away assuming the district doesn't meet a criteria, which is being geographically isolated. It's clear that Dummerston is not geographically isolated from Brattleboro or Putney and Guilford. The other criteria to retain the small schools grant is if you have a unique structure. As Vernon had a unique structure from Dummerston, they have choice 7 through 12. That's why they're not part of this merger. They were at one point, but Dummerston doesn't meet those criteria. So we've been told by the AOE that they do not see Dummerston qualifying for under the exception if this vote fails. Another thing that is the equivalent of a significant support that small schools lose if they don't merge in this case November 7 is something called the hold harmless provision for declining enrollment. What that means is the state has said, yes, we know that it's very difficult for a school board to respond to a significant declining enrollment in 1 year, so they put this 3.5% floor that says you won't decline any more than that. What that does is it creates, so we're talking about numbers, obviously if kids don't come to the school, they don't come to the school. So that means that when we go to calculate cost per student, they say, well, we're going to give you a higher number than you really have. For Dummerston right now, that difference is 5 students. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but 5 students on 155 students or 145 students, it's about 3%, and that goes right to the tax rate if we don't either cut spending by 3% or find 3% in some kind of new money. So those are kind of significant financial losses.
Could I just have you elaborate then, in all the schools that are going to be part of this, what are they all getting for small school grants, and how does that compare to what the state is now offering, the 150? Is it equal?
So Guilford is the other district in our region that is getting the small schools grant, and that's actually a larger number. It's ranged a lot because of their enrollment's been dropping more dramatically than than the other towns. I think they went from about 200 students down to
Went from 299 down to 101.
101, so that, just a tremendous drop over the last several years. So that right now is estimated to be about 60,000. And the reason why these things are relevant to Dummerston, even though we're talking about Guilford grant, is if the merger is successful, the system retains them, in this case $100,000 and $150,000 and those tax credits. But if the merger fails, they're not available for the future state of whatever this new structure is.
So no other schools within the district are getting small school grants? Just
Yeah, generally it's once you had either a less than 100 students or your average class size can't be more than 20 students in a grade level consistently. And Dummerston has fallen into that category. We have many grade levels with less than 20 students.
I'd just like to clarify that $150,000 grant, I believe, is a one-time grant for the transitional costs.
Yes, that's
So you're
right.
not comparing an ongoing grant with that $150,000. It's a one-time thing.
But they also have to grant their grant that they've already received from that.
Yeah, there's
And I believe-
$20,000.
I also believe there's another exception for small school grants that you can apply for an exceptional school if you're doing well with students in
Yes,
poverty and you're
yes.
achieving excellence. I believe there's another additional exception for applying for small school grants for schools that are not unmerged.
I haven't seen that. Okay.
It's on an AOE document.
Mhm.
I can email it to you.
Good.
More questions? Dick?
Sorry. I'm Dick Bertzkus from Dummerston. I have a bad internet. It's hard to get going. It's hard for me to actually talk about this whole subject without talking about the Section 9 alternative. And I'm not sure how many people really understand the difference. And we've spent a whole year and a half talking with you all about the other possibility. And I know that you looked at it initially. You said you did. It's actually under the law, the purview of the school boards to get together and discuss as an alternative. Your committee didn't set up a subcommittee for an alternative study. Marlboro did. Washington Central did. Excuse me?
We did have subcommittees on alternative, two of them.
Okay.
This study committee had two subcommittees that looked at alternatives at two different times.
Alternatives to merger or merger alternatives?
Yeah.
Which?
Christina, you and I were on one at one point.
We looked at,
Alice was on maybe with Christina, and I was on with David Scholes.
it's the problem of alternatives, Dick. So we looked at various.
You looked at the
alternatives.
merger alternatives. You didn't look at alternatives to merger.
We looked at as all the options that were listed at that
Those are
time.
merger alternatives. The reds and all that.
All the reds, all the ways that we could comply with the
What
law.
I'm talking about is the alternative merger, which is specified in Section 9 as an alternative governance structure defined as a supervisory union with member district schools.
I would argue that I feel like when I sat on that subcommittee, we did look at that.
And did you look at it for how long and to what detail? Because it looks like it's a year-long project if you do it right. You've got it now down to where school board members won't get together to talk about it as an alternative plan B if this merger fails. And and you're saying until December 26th to submit an application. I've also heard that,
That was the answer from Donna Russo Savage,
Yeah.
not something
well,
to say.
yeah, I think, we've also heard that if an outline is underway, that you get an extension for that. So it's a little misleading to say it's got to be done by December and to do it in 2 months when you've had 2 years to get together with this.
I'm not here to argue, but I want to make sure that people are clear. What we
Yeah.
put up there, we quoted directly so that people can see exactly what she said in that answer. I mean, it's your interpretation or the interpretation of anybody else of what it says.
Okay, so anyway, a couple of questions. Can you cite examples of where in Vermont money has been saved or performance outcomes have been improved because of a merger?
Yes. I mean,
Where?
we can use our own district. We can.
How can you use your own district if you haven't
Well,
merged?
if you let me finish. So, I forget the number of the act, maybe, but it was several years. 156. Act 156 required schools, districts throughout the state to transition special education, transportation, and food service expenses to the supervisory union level. Yeah, I know it, you're shaking your head no, but let me finish. Okay, this was mandated. Our supervisory union saw it coming. We did it the year before it was mandated. That first year, we saved $300,000. The second year, we saved $700,000.
Right, and we didn't lose our school board.
That wasn't the question you asked, though.
But yeah, that wasn't the question you asked. I'm giving you some concrete numbers saying that this
I know about special education, I know that number. Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so that's not my question.
Yep.
My question is, where has the supervisory union submitted an alternative governance structure application and saved money, or other districts that have saved money or had performance outcomes
I
improved?
don't know where anybody has submitted an alternative governance
It hasn't been
structure. But the mergers, the data is starting to flow out.
Yeah.
Some of the mergers are only a year or two old, so that's part of the whole catch-up process, and part of the whole learning process for all of us on study committees is that, you know, the struggle we've had is having available information. What we've had to do is do exactly what our local school boards will be doing if this vote fails. We will be doing a self-evaluation, looking at how, you know, we can meet the requirements of the law, and what savings we think we can present to them.
And we've been doing that as well, and we've tried to incorporate other boards. We had some resistance from Putney. We do have a member from Putney on our group. We've had 2 community members from Guilford coming by to be sort of intermediaries to their school board to talk about what we're trying to develop, what we're trying to explore. Right. Guilford has come, Brattleboro has come. They came late to the table, but I think, thanks to Jill, we're encouraged to come and be a part of that discussion, just because there may be a need for a plan B, and it is time consuming, and we are doing that self-evaluation. But my understanding, when I heard you talk earlier, my understanding is that if this vote fails, that it becomes the purview of the school boards to get together and figure out something else. Now, you're saying that Putney's made up its mind and Guilford's made up their mind.
I didn't say that. I said I understood that.
Well, that's what I heard you say.
I think we can't say anything on what any of the local boards will do
Right.
after the unification vote.
Okay.
But we do know what each one of us has to do under the purview of the law. Whether it is together with other districts, like Putney, Dummerston, Brattleboro, Guilford, to present a different proposal.
Right.
You know, and if you recall, when things were getting quite heated, and I know you were getting really frustrated, I kept asking for you to give me a plan, and I would take it to the study committee. And, you know, to date, I still haven't seen a plan.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's an unfair question, because under the law, it has to be the school boards that present you with a plan. And you've prevented this from happening the last 2 years. You guys.
So I think that's,
Okay.
I've been liberal in my minute with you. Thank you for your comments and your input.
So who's next? And just to remember that we're all very concerned about our school boards. We're all nice people. We're very concerned about children and public education. So, you know, I know we all have the best interests at heart. So maybe give each other a little slack going forward, and an extra little bit of kindness too. Because I don't, you know, Dick, I really like you. So I want you to know that. So, Inez.
This is just in response to Dick, because I was just looking at Section 9. And Section 9, I don't think lets boards just sit on their hands if a merger vote fails. They're actually required to meet with other boards and discuss ways to collaborate. I don't think that the time between now and a state plan is a time when a board can just sit on their hands and do nothing. But also, I have some doubts about the state's power to force mergers. Mergers in the law are written as contractual agreements, and I don't know how debts and assets and liabilities can be disposed of anyway, other than by agreements between all these towns. So collaboration is going to be necessary going forward regardless of the outcome of the vote. One of the things that makes this so difficult is that for many of the towns and for many townspeople, we're being asked to choose what is behind curtain number 3. And we're told, say it's a car, that it's a leased car. And many of us feel like we're driving a fully paid off Subaru that's turbocharged. And so to give up something that we control and that drives well and that we own and we know how it works, and being told that we have to choose what is behind curtain number 3, even these articles don't actually lay out a game plan. And it's impossible to know what a yet unformed board is going to do. We have never seen a budget explaining how much it's going to cost to keep schools open for 5 years, and if equity is going to cost X, Y, or Z, what is that going to do to our tax rate? It is a gigantic unknown. I'm always willing to listen to data and see if other districts actually succeed in improving outcomes and saving money, but I would prefer to wait until we hear that data and see that data before I would be willing as a voter to take that gigantic leap and lose my local school board.
So can I just make, I take exception to the leased car analogy, because as a community, if this unification is, the merger is approved, then we will also own the car behind curtain number 3.
But we go from 100% ownership to 11% ownership.
We go from 100% to a bigger 100%.
Well, we have 11% voting power in a merged district, so we're giving up quite a bit. And that's an undeniable fact. The state itself has recognized that's one of the problems with a lot.
And that is something that we try to address in the composition of the board.
Understood.
Yes. So, but you know, I look at it. I don't think Jill made this comment at the Brattleboro breakfast meeting about all of us.
See what I made her comment down.
About all of us on the study committee, we didn't all start out as believers. And it has been a process where we fluctuated back and forth, you know, to believer, to non-believer, you know, to somewhere in the middle. And I think the fact that in the end we all voted to move this forward unanimously indicates that, you know, we were able to find some very significant common ground that we thought would benefit communities and schools, so, or students mostly. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, Aaron Holtz, Dummerston. Help me out with something. If the merger goes through, isn't it going to be a necessity to upstaff the school district, the unified school district?
No. They currently handle they have 7 sets of books right now that they handle. There would not be, in actuality, it would simplify things. It would make Frank's
would
life.
love to think that's true, but what I see is there will not be a cost savings. You are going to have to add more staff.
Why is that? Yeah.
Fewer board members.
Because you're picking up the whole governance.
9 people.
We're already doing that with the existing staff that we have. Except for what now we have to do is segregate 7 different schools versus combine them all together.
I have my doubts. Let's look at it 2 years from now if we're unified.
Anybody before me, right?
No, no, I just was looking at Geraldine.
You know,
I'll take you next year.
I do want to say, Amy, that I think this board and I think the people that have been fighting to keep what we have all care for children. And quite frankly, I was horrified to watch the video of our study committee up at the State Board of Education saying that we were all not interested in students, only in adult issues. And that was said 3 times. I've got the quotes. I can tell you where they are. And I think we are all care about our students. So back to the other thing. We have a supervisory union that has been operating well over 50 years, and we've been operating very well and in a very friendly fashion with all of the towns. And back to Dick. Dick forgot to say in the group that is working on an alternative merger, which is in the law and can be done, and we have been working as a group. Brattleboro's formed a committee, Dummerston's formed a committee, and Vernon has been joining us. And one of our hopes is that if we can keep with the alternative, that Vernon could stay with us as our friendly neighbor and our friendly school. One of the things I looked at today, I just happened to get online, I was made aware of a place where you could look called Great Schools. And I had a grandmother tell me a couple of years ago that that's what she looked for to find Dummerston School, and that's where she wanted her granddaughter to go. And Dummerston has been up at number 8, which is probably about the highest you can get out of 10 unless you're a high school. And I want to say that 4 out of 6 of our elementary schools are 8s or 7s. I think that's pretty damn good. And I know that our district and our supervisory union has been one of the top supervisory unions in the state and one of the best performing supervisory unions. And I would like to keep that, work on it, and make it better. Now, as far as what's happening in the state, right now there are 11 supervisory unions working on alternative to merger.
Yep.
That's over 60, 70 schools, 62 schools involved in that. And the first ones are coming, which is a 13-district school supervisory union up in the northern part of the state under one superintendent, and it's a well-working district. And they're bringing it to the October, when they may have already brought it to the October, I don't know, meeting, but November. So we're not the only ones considering this. The ones that started earlier with their mergers were mergers that were already in the works before Act 46 came along, and merged and jumped right in order to get the quote incentives, which aren't incentives. And I know that one of them in particular, the costs have gone up, and I know that. So, you know, I would just like to encourage all of us to, if we vote yes at the, on the vote, there's no going back. There's no getting out of it. If we vote no, we have a chance to continue a conversation in a different format than the 706B format, which was really to promote a merger, not to just look at the goals of Act 46. And the goals are excellent. I don't think there's anybody in this whole group who wouldn't promote the goals. And I think we can do it without giving up our school, without giving up our school board, without giving up anything. Okay, is she telling me to shut up? Okay.
So, no, I was reminding you that your time is up.
Oh, is that what you, very gently. I wasn't looking at you, I was looking at Amy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of things. So this is the latest, this was from the Vermont School Board Association. All the areas in red are the successful votes for unification that are happening around the state. The other areas are either in process or haven't formed a study committee yet, or, you know, so most likely won't be doing anything.
Or doing an alternative.
Yeah, so, you know, this gives you an indication of, and this is available, I don't know if it's on the VSBA's website, this document. Probably is on the Vermont AOE's website as well.
We can put it on our.
Yeah, we can put it on ours too, but this is, you know, meaningful information about what our neighbors across the state are doing. And I do recognize that, that we have our students' best interests in mind.
And we do too.
I mean you and me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so, but I think we need to, one of the things that the Secretary of Education said to me, or said to a group of us, was that when a elementary program gets to around 130 students, that's when things start to get dicey. The only real way for them to reduce expenses is to start cutting programming. If you take away our middle school program, we're pretty close to that, if not already there, which to me is a little disconcerting. And also, I've read, you know, of course, all the letters to the editor that I see, and my takeaway, having been at the State Board of Education meeting, was not the same as yours. So I think it's also,
I got your quotes.
I think you can take it for however you want, but it was not, it was an acknowledgement that there is not agreement in our communities. So, you know, I thought Alice and I felt it was important. Suzanne?
The map that you were just holding up.
Yep.
Could you hold it up again? Are those varying shades of darker pink and red? Because the last time I looked at that map, I thought there were a lot fewer that were actually
This is what
merged.
I have it says as of 6/6. So maybe there's a more recent version, but this is what I
So
got.
there aren't like pink and medium pink and dark pink and then red?
No, the red is a successful vote. The pinks say it says approved, proposal defeated. Blue is proposal defeated. Yellow is a 706 merger study committee. And then gray is a supervisory district.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, let me take you. And then, no, she keeps making eye contact with me. I called her. Go ahead.
Geraldine Wilson. So in looking around the room, it seems to me the majority of people here are not people with children in the school. And so I'm just curious, and maybe you can't answer this, but I'm just curious what the parent body of the school, what the feeling is there.
Well, I don't have a child in the school, so I think we'll find out when it comes to the voting. My youngest is in high school.
But the parent, I mean, this is all about our children and the school. I don't know, Joe Carroll's here.
Our school board members have been,
are parents engaged with this? No.
Yes. Somewhat, yes, they are. Well, they're not at school board meetings. I mean, besides Inez.
I have a very nice
Sue, who's now a board member. But, you know,
They're all at soccer games.
Well, they're putting their kids to bed. I mean, you know, it's a tough time when you have elementary school kids at home. But I just was curious if someone had a sense of how the parents of the Dummerston School feel on this issue of the merger. And I didn't know that you, I didn't assume you'd be able to answer it.
I mean, the information I would have is anecdotal. There's, you know, there's some people that are expressing interest, like, oh, well, that school choice would be a great thing. Is that something we could accomplish in some other fashion? And that's really gone to the top of the list in terms of an alternative structure. I think there's a lot of concern around the potential closure of the middle school, and there isn't any language in there. So I think that's something I've heard anecdotally. But I just want to say, we did a town survey, but it was not, people didn't identify on that whether they had children or not, so I can only do this for you and say, these are the conversations that I've heard from people and the concerns that people have brought to me in the grocery store, in the hardware store, at strolling of the heifers and things that people have asked about.
You know, and likewise to me in the grocery stores and all that, I mean, I hear both sides. I hear, you know, keep at it, you're in the right direction, thank you, you know, for taking all that heat, and then you have other people that yell at me across the parking lot and telling me I'm ruining Dummerston School. I should be ashamed of myself. So, you know, it really runs the gamut. So, then the attempt is not to ruin Dummerston School, it's to, or any other school in the district, it's to make sure that it remains viable, that we deliver the education that our students need, and, you know, to be successful. And looking down my lens of having been on the school board for 14 years, I haven't seen where we have been able to add to our programming. What we've had to do is to chip away, bit by bit. And that is my concern, that if we go it alone, we're going to have to keep chipping away, and, you know, we won't be able to offer kids what they need. So. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the most ignorant ones here, but my question is, I do know that we here in Dummerston have one of the best schools in the state. And I can see how, my question is, I can see how Brattleboro, you know, if it's voted in, they're going to have 4 votes of their own, and then because of there's a lot more of them than there are us, they're going to have the other 4 votes pretty much, probably 2. So they're going to have
the decisions are gonna end up being Brattleboro's, not ours. I just wonder who's gonna benefit. To me, standing outside, it looks as though Brattleboro is gonna benefit, and a good deal more than we are.
They have 4 voting members. Brattleboro has voting members. That's dictated to us by statute, and it's based on population census data.
Well, I know it's based on population, but there are a lot more of you than there are of us.
And then there are 5 other positions. So there's the 2 at-larges, and you can't necessarily assume that those will come from Brattleboro.
Well, but we have
And then we have the
12,000
3
people
others.
voting in Brattleboro and 1,000 voting each of us around.
And I also like, I think this is where Ricky would be really great to speak to, because at the high school level, they have been voting on issues related to all of our children for many, many years. And I think Ricky has
That's what I wanted to say. I mean, I think there's 2 pieces to your question that I think about. And I think, first of all, I think it's important for people to know that as part of the study committee, we were initially told you either had to do it in this way or this way, and we said no, we want a hybrid where the smaller towns get more of a say. So that's where the 2 at-large voting members came from, and that was discouraged by legal counsel for us to do that, and we said, tough, we're doing it anyway. That's one thing. The other piece too is related to the on the high school board. We have 9 members right now on the high school board because it includes Vernon. And if we had gone with what was the preferred way to go with 9 members, Brattleboro would have 4 or 5 and 1 each from the other towns, and that would be it. And I think that the way that we did it was a way to try to make that a little bit more balanced. The other piece to it is that on the high school board, we don't always, and there's 3 of us here from the high school board that are in this room, we don't always necessarily agree on everything that comes down the pike. But I think that we all do agree that we look at what's in the best interest of all of the kids that are in that school. From, the few middle school kids, the partial middle school, and all the high school kids. And I don't recall in all the years that I've been on that board, there ever being a vote where the 5 Brattleboro members basically voted down everybody else's question or thought in the process. And if I would ask my colleagues that if I'm wrong about that, please let me know. But I don't recall us ever being the 5 Brattleboro people voting in a block to say, we're going to do this, and the 4 of you forget it, we're not going to do that. And I would hope that the people that continue to run for the unified board, if this passes, would be that same kind of collegiate group to do that.
I agree, Ricky. We have been very cohesive. We've really always voted pretty much as a block. But we have one campus, one group of kids. We don't have schools here and there and the other place to consider. And if you think a $27 million budget is massive, wait till you get the budgets of all these towns, plus the high school budget. And no place to talk about it.
Amy, I'd like to kind of, I sit on the Brattleboro Town School Board, so we don't have one campus. We have one town, but we have Green Street, Oak Grove Academy, plus EES, which is in 2 buildings, plus Westminster, which actually falls under our purview as well, even though it's a different area entirely. On my time on the board, which I can't remember, I think it's like 8 years now, it's too long. The majority of our board, I'm looking at Mark and Kim that are sitting here, have been from Academy School. All the time.
How's Green Street?
Some Green Street in your time frame, but mainly in mine, it's been mainly Academy School. And then the parents keep aging up and not necessarily leaving the board right away. And yet, I've never voted for anything just thinking of Academy School, even though that's where my kids were. It's just not how it works.
But that was our playing field. We had initially, we didn't have to go through these throes, if I may interject. We joined the boards knowing that we had the 3 elementary school, the early education, high school, tech school, middle school. So we knew what that was like going in. This is an entirely different animal, and I can appreciate the question.
So
Speak
when
of
you
it.
decide board members are running, they know that they'd be for the entire district, the entire group. And the board meetings are set up in the articles by the way to move and rotate so that they would have to, the board members would have to get to know all the schools.
There's a 5-year grace period where you don't have to think about merging. But surely you all.
Closing.
Closing.
Yeah.
Okay, but you all must have talked about what would happen after 5 years.
No.
Well, it seems like one would need to have a vision, even if it wasn't a pleasant vision. Would we go, join schools? Would we bus our kids?
Well, if I may, we talked about it as a study committee in that after that 5 years, what's the process, which is what's in the Article of Agreement. So we did talk about it in that regard, that if we had to start looking at closing a school, what would be the process to do that? So we looked at that process, but as far as shipping kids, busing kids, I don't think we've even thought about that because that will be the purview of the new unified board and the administration at the time to make those decisions. And as Jill, I think I'll use Jill's example she gave a little while ago, Oak Grove is very similar in size to some of these other, the smaller schools in the smaller towns. Maybe that's the decision that gets made, that one of the schools in Brattleboro is the school that closes, and the others, Dummerston keeps its school, Putney keeps its school, Guilford keeps its school, and maybe there is some busing, whatever, but that's all purview of the new unified district. It wasn't the purview of the study committee to come up with that plan, because in 6 years, 5 or 6 years from now, who knows what's going to happen? There could be a huge population increase or a huge population decrease that would dictate some things for us right there.
I guess I don't understand. I just heard who knows what's going to happen, and I see a list of things of why we should merge. And one of the things that I haven't heard anything about is what will happen, why it will happen, and the fact that we no longer will have a vote. We will no longer have a direct input. So what we're being asked to do in a simple form is to take an idea that has not been given any foundation for numbers. You haven't talked about busing, you haven't talked about changing classes, you haven't talked about moving principals or eliminating principals, you haven't done any numbers. But we no longer, if we vote in favor of this merger, will have the ability to have a direct input as a town. So you're saying to us, please trust us, trust an idea, but we're not giving you any information, any direct input on what change is going to happen.
Well, I think
No,
I'm sorry.
Sure. So, and I'm going to hear something back, I'm sure, but I'm going to go to Frank and say, what numbers have you gone through? What formulas have you looked at as far as the kinds of things, changing programs, changing busing, changing overhead principals, et cetera, to go into the new merged school that would make it a more efficient school? What numbers have you gone through and presented back to either the board or the communities that are the direct result of what this vote will be?
You want me to respond to that?
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
So the study committees followed the guidance of the legislature in the crafting of Act 46, which is to say what you just asked is exactly the wrong way to approach the analysis. They're saying that the most important thing is to understand the educational opportunity in the region. And you've heard tonight that's what this committee has done, and they've recognized that there is quite a disparity in opportunity throughout the region. And then, so that's that first goal, equity. Then the second goal is around quality of education. So this committee has spent an awful lot of time on identifying what is a quality education and how do we either sustain what we have or do we need to invest further in particularly the areas that were definitely not representative of an equitable opportunity. So that's the second goal. The third goal is affordability. And what you've heard again is there's no intent to substantially change what we do now from a programming point of view. So to get at your point, well, where's the scenario analysis around like transportation? Well, there is no intent to substantially change the transportation routes because the intent is to run the schools as they are. The substantial differences as the findings in the law as presented by the legislature, and this is over a 5-year period of looking at statewide data and our own data, and then more recently the Secretary of Education, is to say we recognize that the small governance structures for 2,400 students to have 7 governance structures is not a cohesive structure in which you can maximize the utilization of your staff. And that's not our observation. That is a statewide observation that says how is it that we could have a 20% decline across the state, and we've seen it in our own region in enrollment, but our staffing has remained either level or even grown. Why is that? And the answer is when you are 7 separate employers with separate interests when it comes to a tax rate, which means you have different interests. Dummerston has a different interest when it comes to paying for public education because you have 145 students and your cost is about $17,000 a student versus Guilford, who has a separate grand list, a separate student base, and a separate incentive to invest or not invest in programs. So the core of what you've heard from the committee is that this is all about governance reform that allows us to pay attention to students and student learning and opportunity by removing the barriers around employment, sharing resources, fully utilizing our staff.
So can I say, on page 4, and the cost implications, page 4 of the report, in the middle section, there are some bulleted items that we identified just off the top that were easy, low-hanging fruit where we thought we could see savings. So if that's the type of thing that you would like to see.
So listening, I don't know whether my time is still here, but listening to the non-answer, the non-direct answer, I see where we're headed. Part of the reason I keep coming back with these direct questions, I've had the opportunity, maybe not great opportunity, to be in front of a community and tell them that the state had a great plan that was better for them. You haven't done that yet. It was called Act 60. And to be able to stand up and say, this is Act 60 that was formulated by the state of Vermont, and you are going to be better, and these are the reasons why. And it didn't work. And so I had been in those shoes without a plan, but the idea. And to come to us who are as equally involved in our community as you folks are, and to say we have an idea of a governance with no background, with no details, and say you should lose your ability to vote directly in your school system. And that's what we're doing. You lose your ability to vote, to be part of the direct input of your school over an idea that someday will be better, but we're not going to tell you why.
I don't understand why you say you're losing the ability to vote. You still would get to vote on the
We
budget.
will not be able to vote. We will not be able to come here and say, we want this building, we want these teachers, we want this program. We lose that ability. We lose
But you can't do that now. At town meeting, you can say, I want to put forth
Sure.
this much money, but it's up to your school board to decide.
That's right, and we vote the school board in. We say, through you, give back to us, we will have that communication, and we will vote in the negative or the affirmative.
And you'll have that vote as well with voting of the unified board and voting on members of your leadership council for your school.
But we will not have one-to-one. We will not have one-to-one.
And you'll get to vote on a high school budget that right now you have to go out to a
And-
separate meeting. And you'll get to vote on everybody else's
Sure,
budget.
and this
the
is
supervisor's
a classic example of why we differ.
It's been 5 minutes
Sure.
on this topic, thank you.
Yep.
We've done the 1 to 5 split on this, so I think, thank you, Eve. Yes.
Diana Wally. I have a question, and it's regarding the quality of education goal. And maybe I should preface it by saying I just really appreciate all of the work that has been put into thinking about these various goals. So on the quality of education piece, I was really glad you included the slide about the test results for all of our schools. And I must say I was quite disappointed that our math scores in Dummerston are as low as they are, and I noticed that in some of the other schools they're higher. So I'd like you to just educate me of how could Dummerston gain from the merger in terms of perhaps gaining better math education that might raise those scores through being part of a larger entity than we are now.
I don't know if, Lyle, you want to speak to that?
I think I'd actually like our principal to speak to that a little bit, if she'd be willing to, because she's moving around a little bit, or...
I missed that slide, I think.
So it's just asking, it's a kind of rhetorical question in a way, in that certainly there are positive things that we want to maintain in our town. But the math scores were lower than I would want them to be. I would like to see them improve. And there are other schools in our district that have higher scores. So my question is just, how can, through the merger, can we gain from maybe its teaching expertise or teacher education, or perhaps a different approach to the curriculum that we wouldn't be able to access as we are now?
See, I would answer that question by saying I'm not sure that that's accurate. I thought that our math scores, percentage of kids, was
maybe
higher than other schools in the district. Maybe not at each grade level, but
as a whole.
As a whole, was pretty high.
They were pretty, yeah.
53.
30, I thought it was 30.
It's 58.
No matter the numbers.
I guess it isn't the.
But this year it's 63%, so, I mean, so there was an increase.
I'm just saying, I wish it could be higher, and maybe that's just an example for educating us about how, if a score is lower than you want it to be, how the merger could really help us.
By program sharing.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking for an example.
Has a higher average. And what do they do in right to bring our school up to what, so we're all doing it right is what we're looking at.
And maybe we're all doing it even better.
Exactly.
So we can answer that through English language arts. Our score is higher.
Well, the English ones were really high, I know.
Right. So let me tell you why. One of the things that we've done consistently, long before other schools have done it, is used a reading program. We sort of targeted, we didn't sort of go off in a bunch of different ways, leave it up to each grade level to decide how they're going to about teaching reading. We're going to take the strategies that we know that teaches children to learn how to read, and used it and made sure that consistently each grade level did what they needed to do. That had really good results for us. And in the past 12 years, I think the other schools have come around to understanding that process and
Maybe
using it.
adopting it in their own way.
Yes. Maybe not curriculum per se, but certainly a curriculum that is going to have those strategies that we know teaches kids to learn how to read. You know, we did that as a supervisory union. We did that with the coaching that came out of central office, teacher leaders, all the things that we still benefit from. And the same would be true with math. I mean,
I'm just curious if you have any other thoughts after having done all the hard research that you've done about improving that quality.
Lyle, did you want to?
Sure. So, as Joe Carroll just mentioned, teacher leaders I see as a huge bang for the buck. And we have some very highly qualified math teachers in this school, one of whom actually was our first district math coach. So being able to use her in that way, making sure that she has enough funding, so yes, she's still teaching her regular job during the day, but for teacher leaders, we also pay them a stipend because they have to plan and work with staff, co-teach with staff, prepare staff meetings so that there's ongoing professional development all the time around a specific area. So that's just one example of.
So can the merger enhance that?
It would, because it would spread the cost of that across 2,000, 2,300 students instead of 145 students.
I guess that's answering my question.
Maybe one more point on that is I believe Dummerston does not qualify for Title I, is that correct? Yeah, so Title I is about a $1.2 million grant from the federal government that's specifically for literacy and math remediation for students at risk of failing. And it's been remarkably successful. Back to that slide where you see 74% poverty at Academy School, and their reading scores are at the same level or better than many, is a direct result of what Lyle just said. It's the intervention that is so effective at the early grade level. Well, Dummerston doesn't qualify for that investment through the grant because it's a grant targeted for a higher poverty district. And unfortunately, that statistic varies, so it's sometimes difficult to actually plan a consistent mechanism for providing services, year in and year out. A merge system would eliminate that barrier. And kind of going back to Reed's question about finance, and what Lyle just said again is that an investment at a local district, right now, Dummerston, has a significantly different tax impact than it does to any of the other districts, because you have your unique financial characteristics around cost per student. So, we had a slide up here, maybe we eliminated the one that shows our schools and how close we are to the cost containment threshold. It's called a penalty, a spending penalty. That's in an earlier PowerPoint. But it basically shows that Dummerston has exceeded that number, which means that it increases the tax rate for every dollar you spend over. I think that example is $17,600, something like that. So my point is that a merge system eliminates those separate sort of incentives or disincentives, because it's one budget divided by all of our children, derives one tax rate. The merger says that they will take that tax rate and reduce it by 8 cents in the first year, and so on. But to speak to your question, it does make the resources that are available at Academy and Green Street and Oak Grove School available to all the schools. So you can scale up programs so much more effectively.
Thank you,
Yeah, so when Title I money that we would get in a merger, wouldn't that take away from the other students who need it more than we do? Yeah, I think it would. I really do, because it's still the same amount of money that has to go around.
It allows the instructors who are employed with that funding to affect all kids in all buildings. When there's
traveling around to all buildings?
there would be you plan a budget, you know where your needs are, you look at data like what we saw on the screen that Diana was referring to. You see where learning is excelling, you understand what is happening there, and then you can replicate that in any building without regard to whether or not you qualify for the funding that allows the employee to be dedicated to that purpose. Now, Jo Carroll has made those investments with local funds as best she can.
And she's doing an excellent job with it.
She is, yes, as you can see, yeah. But the Title I funding simply helps.
If we don't need it, why would we want to take it away from somebody else?
No, it's not really taking away.
Yeah.
It is using it to develop programs that would impact more students. That's.
That doesn't make sense. It does.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
Well, if you can agree to disagree, yes, ma'am.
Changing the subject, it's okay.
Yeah, but see, you've actually commented once, I just want to make sure everybody else has had a chance to comment.
Okay.
Thank you. I was going to ask this question, a long-winded question on paper, but it's easier to ask it going forward. The study committee has consistently refused to incorporate in the Articles of Agreement about having a town having a vote, and that's come up in a couple of places here this evening, but about the town having a vote as to whether or not the school will be closed and whether or not its class configurations would change. Now, Ricky, you mentioned earlier that, nobody has given any thought to closing schools, and that would be for the next board to do. Well, I suspect that probably none of you folks are going to be on the next board, 6 or 7 years from now.
Ricky's running.
Well, perhaps you will, but I hope you are. But I guess what I'm saying is that your thinking isn't necessarily going to be the same thinking of a future board. And that future board could be very MBA related, and they'll be sitting down looking at numbers and charts and configurations, and they will be sitting down and saying, oh, well, we don't need Dummerston, they've only got 100 kids because we moved their 7th and 8th graders to Brattleboro, and they only have 100 kids, and their cost per pupil, it doesn't make sense to maintain that facility. We're gonna ship them down to Brattleboro. Well, Alice and I think Jill also mentioned that the towns would know when it would be appropriate to close a school. If you got down, well, you used the figure of 10 or 14 kids, I think, or something like that. But you said, well, the town will know. Well, why are you taking that discretion away from the town? Jill at one time at the study committee meetings said, well, I don't want to tie the hands of a future board. And I can understand that kind of thinking, but what you're literally doing, don't you think you're tying the hands of the community by not giving the community a say into whether or not a school will be closed?
Did you want an answer?
Yeah.
Yes. You want an answer? Yes. Or you want anybody?
There's a statement and a question.
Okay. So my answer to you, Paul, on that, because I am the one who said all the time that I will not support putting in a vote for the town, although I also said I'm happy to have a vote by the town, but it's a non-binding vote. I want to hear from the town if I'm on that board. That's why I wrote what's in there that says that there has to be a long process. It has to go through a whole bunch of forums and all of that. However, in the end, it is all of us who are looking at all of the children. So let me just ask this way. Does Dummerston want to keep paying for Oak Grove School if that's the one that should be closed because Oak Grove gets down to 35 kids?
I'm concerned about Dummerston.
Exactly, but I'm not, because I'm looking at it as a merged unit. And that's my point of why it's written that way. The board would look at everybody. And I guess you say too that the board, you hope Ricky runs or whoever and whatever. In all the time I've been on the board and all of you people that have been on boards that have come back to these meetings, we're not here because we're out for some sort of superior glory. My word, we could find better things to do with our time. The people that come to this stuff is because we come concerned for kids. I just don't see people running for school board positions because they're out for some specific thing.
I hope I didn't imply that.
No, but I think that anyone who comes for the board all the time, a unified board, a Dummerston board, a Brattleboro board, whatever, I think we come in at looking at kids. That's why we come to this stuff.
And if I can too, Paul, you said you don't know, we don't know what's going to happen in 6 or 7 years, what the makeup of that board's going to be. And I would argue that that's the way it is right now with every single school board. I don't know what your term limits are and the overlap is in Dummerston. That's not something I've educated myself on. And all the time I spent with Dummerston folks, I haven't learned that. But I would say that 5 years from now, you could have a Dummerston board that could turn around and decide, we're closing the school. And they could make that decision and say, we're gonna bus all of our kids to Brattleboro. And that could happen. If we worry about what might happen as opposed to being part of the process as it happens, that's a halting feeling to me.
But that would be a community decision then, and not, not a decision imposed from from a board that is out of town. So.
I guess I just never saw Dummerston and Brattleboro so far apart as what I keep hearing.
Yeah.
So we're at 5 minutes for that. You all set, Paul, with your?
Yeah. This is John Warren. This is a question about what might happen, what will happen if Dummerston votes no. If Dummerston votes no, the school, is this correct? If Dummerston votes no, the school board could vote to accept these same articles. Is that right?
They could do any number of things.
Is that one of the things they could do?
That is one of the things they can do. They can also, go ahead, sorry.
Does that then become the position of Dummerston?
It would be the position of the board representing the town.
And that would be presented to the state?
Right, that was part of that whole process. I mean, I don't know that would actually happen because they voted on the approval. The board did when I happened to be absent, so it was 4-0. Not in favor of the articles.
Of the merger.
Well, it was about the articles as written.
Oh,
So,
okay. What
but
happens if they vote? If the
they-
board also votes against it?
Then the board needs to come up with some type of alternative plan to present to the state. And I know that the alternative governance subcommittee is working on something.
That would be
We
the
don't know what, but
Brattleboro, or the Dummerston School Board.
yes, Christina leads the subcommittee for the Dummerston. Yes, so I mean, that is actively being looked at, but
I can maybe give you a 30-second explanation, John, that if the articles are voted down, it's up to school boards to decide what goes forward. It could be very well that the school board looks at the alternatives and says, let's do it anyway. That is an option, absolutely. If it's voted down in all the towns resoundingly, if it's a close vote or something, who knows? I think we're going to be very informed because this has not been put to the voters, and it's one of the great parts about this is it's going to be put to the voters, so we're going to see where people lie. If Brattleboro hates it, it would be an interesting position of Brattleboro to say, we want these articles, or if Guilford hates it. So it's a little hard for anybody here to sit here selling futures about what will happen when we don't have the results of a vote. So I think we'll know a lot more very late on November 7th or very early on November 8th. So there's various options. Dummerston could submit an alternative governance structure to go it alone. That has challenges with it. We could, if it's voted down in many towns and many other towns want to do that, we could look at a way to do an enhanced supervisory union, which is under the Section 9 of Act 46. We could bring it to the state in very short order and say this is what we'd like to do, and hopefully the State Board of Education would approve it. There's some other ideas out there about what Dummerston could do. We could privatize our school. That's been discussed and looked at because Dummerston School Board was charged with looking at all the options. So speaking for Dummerston, that's what we've been looking at and thinking about what we could do if the public doesn't support this vote. So does that the study committee's done on November 7th because we have submitted a vote. Well, it's done whenever the vote is certified, right, by the statute. So whenever the town clerks certify the vote, the study committee is done, and it's up for the boards to decide. And I shop at Hannaford's often. You can find me at True Value often if you have. And we have about 2 meetings a month, and so we'll probably be having more if the vote is down to solicit public opinion and make sure that we're hearing what the community wants to do.
I don't envy you.
Merry Christmas, Jeff.
So, I just keep going back to the school closing, just things that I have read over the time. First of all, that historically, we're thinking of closing schools because we don't have enough kids to fill the school. Historically, something went back and north. They go up, they go down. They go up, they go down. And it goes along like that. And I don't know whether anybody's wandering, you say wandering around Hannaford. mostly what I see in Hanover is babies and toddlers, hundreds of them every place. So there's a possibility. But also, I think eventually there's a good possibility because of the climate change that the population of Vermont will grow because we're not going to have floods and that's hypothetical. But one thing that was researched, or not researched, but somebody brought up in the towns that have closer schools, they find that the value of the real estate drops off because people do not want to live in a town where there is, to buy a house in a town where there is no school.
And that directly speaks to why Jill crafted the language the way she did in the school closure where we get
And school in that town.
Yes.
Not school that we go to that's in
understand that.
Brattleboro, but school in that town. People,
Right.
because the values of the value of their house drops.
You know, and just to sort of revisit the whole school closure, there's not going to be any school closures in the first 5 years if the unification is successful. There's no school closures the first 5 years. It's a time for the unified district to get its bearings, to look at how it can operate together efficiently and see what the future holds. I mean, I know you speak of the fluctuations, but looking over the past 20 years, we have seen a distinct decrease in the student enrollment numbers. If you look at the census data in terms of the age of the average Vermonter, that's going up. So we're not drawing young people in who have families here, who are bringing children.
But that also tends to change.
So,
It is changing. It is changing in Dummerston.
but that's not the information that
My
was.
grandchildren are looking for a house up here, and
It's 8:10. Most of the members of the study committee have at least one other meeting to go to this week, another forum in another community by statute.
Yes, there are 4 others in our community.
So-
Please feel free to come to those as well.
I think a round of applause for those who have traveled from other towns and answered your questions, and would be a nice Dummerston. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's trying to keep to the time limits and speaking respectfully tonight. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second. All those in favor?
All right.